Well, then experts say that the recent outbreaks in the country in the agriculture space, not least of which this bird flu outbreak as well as swine flu, point to weaknesses in the biosecurity systems. For more on this, let's speak to agribusiness chief economist Wandile Sihlobo. Wandile, very good evening to you. Good to have your time. In fact, you've been speaking about some of these gaps in our biosecurity systems. Where are the largest gaps and why do they exist?
Thanks for having me on, Tamegile. I think I would start off by saying, firstly, these animal diseases that we're seeing in South Africa are not necessarily unique to us. We do see challenges in the US, we see challenges in Europe, in China, and elsewhere. So these things do happen. But what's unique about us this time around is that we've had foot and mouth disease in our cattle industry, African swine fever, as you just said now, with the pig industry, and of course the avian influenza in there. This means then that we need to enhance the surveillance of some of these diseases. And when we think about biosecurity, I mean, at the most essence of that term, we're looking at saying, what measures do we put in place then upon having the surveillance to control the spread of these diseases? And I think at a provincial level, there are improvements that can be made. And of course, on a vaccine manufacturing, there are certain things that can be put in place there to ensure that we're able to manufacture and have some of the vaccine locally. And I would add and say health technicians, as well as making sure there are more vets in the country. Those are all areas that we should be cognizant and really try to make improvements on.
And how well do you think government has done with this latest outbreak of bird flu? Because it has insisted right from the beginning that while it was worrying and it was a huge outbreak, that it basically had the situation under control. Did it?
It did, Tamegile. I mean, I was part of those conversations, and I've said with the leadership at the Department of Agriculture, I do think that the response was swift after having engaged with the private sector. But of course, the key thing now that we need to be thinking about is to say long term, are we able to put the plans in place? And I think some of those points that I was speaking to begins to allude to that. There was a swift response on saying, can we import some fertilized eggs? And there was an issuance of the import permits to various companies, which is why you see the stock being able to be improved somewhat. And of course, putting some control measures. So I would say there was a bit of a swift response and a good engagement with the private sector that we saw from the leadership. But I would say, Tamegile, at the essence of it, which is what I appreciated the department, it was the fact that there had been a task team which was put in place called the biosecurity task team, which came up with this report which outlined things that we could be doing to ensure that in times like this, we're at least better cushioned. And this is very important, Tamegile, because livestock and poultry makes up about half of South Africa's agricultural economy. So you really have to have measures to control this, because if you don't, it really undermines our rural economy to an extent. So these are all things that I think we should be thinking about and really implementing then what's on that task team report going forward.
And you mentioned earlier the outbreak of foot and mouth disease. That had an impact, didn't it, on our beef exports for 2022? Those were down. In the longer term, what is the international appetite for South Africa's agricultural product? Is there perhaps the risk of a lingering concern or a lack of trust, if you will, in the safety of our products?
I mean, you are raising an important point there, because when we saw these outbreaks opening up, of course, we were suspended to some of the markets. We talk about the foot and mouth, our beef was out of certain markets, and some even went further, like China, to suspend for a period our wool exports. And these typically have a significant economic impact on our rural economy, because, I mean, take China. They import about 70% of our wool. So when we were out of that market, there was an issue. But in overall perception of our products, I would still think South Africa is sitting in as far as being viewed a high-quality producer range of food, fiber, and beverages in the world market. We see that by how much people demand our products. Last year, we sent out to the world just under $13 billion of agricultural products, which was a record level in value and in volume terms. But I think going forward, making sure that we invest a lot of money on strengthening our animal health side is going to be important, because what I'm starting to see, and there's no scientific evidence to this, but it is clear that as climate change intensify, even the occurrences of these diseases gets to be more frequent, which means then we need to be more vigilant, which is why government, working with the private sector, we have to have the surveillance system. We have to have the capability for vaccine manufacturing, because at the end of the day, the world is what buys a lot of our products. We export half of what we produce, so we have to be in good place there. But I think we're still fine for now.
There have been concerns that you've been writing recently about South Africa's biosecurity breaches, especially around issues related to veterinary services, etc. Are we moving at speed to make sure that those gaps are closed and closed quickly?
I am positive, Temigle, that now the gaps are being closed to an extent, but I would encourage an even much more deeper conversation between the private sector as well as government, so that we're not only reacting and talking when the disease is there, and then when things start to slow down, we perhaps maybe take the foot off the pedal. The message that I have heard from the leadership, both on our side in private sector as well as in government, is that biosecurity is one of the top things, along with issues such as ports, electricity, and all of those things. So we really need to get that right. Because I think, Temigle, what many people maybe don't appreciate enough is the fact that I've made the point that half of our agricultural economy is livestock. But others like oilseeds, grains, they are dependent there because they are a feed to this livestock industry. If it's not doing well, it gets to have a much more bigger shock in our system. So this is why some of these things are so important to invest on. We had fallen short as a country now in vaccine manufacturing, like OBP and the others. These are organizations that have taken a hit because of corruption and the other things and weaknesses over time. But I think there are improvements now that are being made, and from what I have seen and what has been recommended, even in the biosecurity task team, those are things that makes one to be hopeful about the future of the sector.
Am I hearing you clearly in terms of saying that what basically needs to happen within the agriculture space is a more proactive rather than reactive response to these outbreaks?
You are hearing me correctly, Tembegile. We hear now, we have to react and put the measures in place, and I think those is what have been done. But going forward, we have to be proactive, and I think that's where the conversation is at amongst all of the players that are in the sector, in government as well as in the private sector, and certainly from our side at Agbiz, that's what we think should be continuously happening.
Agbiz Chief Economist Wandile Sihlobo. Good to speak to you, Wandile. Thank you.